Hello and welcome to World Talks, where every word matters. I'm your host, Sasha Farbach. Now, as leaders of 32 NATO allies gather in Washington, D.C. over the next days, there are many things that are overshadowing the 75th alliance anniversary. The continuing war in Ukraine will be top of the agenda, with several nations pledging more air support in light of the Russian strikes on Ukrainian children's hospitals in the past 24 hours. Let's discuss now what more we can expect from the summit in the U.S. And for that, I'm joined by Robert Pszczel, Senior Fellow at the Center for Eastern Studies. Good to have you on the program. So let's start with this. You're a NATO expert, Robert. Tell us what has been the most impressive to you so far since these announcements, since yesterday, and what more can we expect from the summit?
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I think the first kind of phase, if I want to call it this way, of the summit was quite moving quite, it was about celebrating the fact that NATO is turned 75. And I think Secretary General made an interesting comparison to indeed the longest so far until now, collective defense alliance of the Greek states, which NATO has by now surpassed. No, the point is serious because this is essentially the basis for everything that NATO does. It does enjoy, as recent opinion polls showed, over 70% support of the median in all the NATO countries. And that means NATO is doing something right, and NATO is needed. Now, this summit, as you said, is about, first of all, about the war, the biggest war in Europe since 1945. And as summits shown in the past, and we have not been disappointed, they also, apart from communiques, decisions made at the summit itself, they also bring out, if you like, the best in the countries, among the countries, and that was the case last night. This package of support in terms of providing 5, which is very meaningful, air defense systems to Ukraine, so includes Patriots and some other systems, is really exactly what's needed right now. That's the most urgent, priority, which shows that, the summit is not just operating within the confines of, the wordings, programs, decisions, but it's responding, I think, to real events. And we've seen those tragic events literally in the last few days when Russia has barbarically attacked, hospitals, for example, in Kiev. So these systems, which I hope will, be provided by US and for other allies, will soon get to Ukraine and will start doing their work, which is to, defending the lives of Ukrainians. But of course, the summit is also about a more long-term assistance to Ukraine, and one can expect, one hopes, a very significant, again, if you like, a package, a program. The gist of it will be that NATO will take over responsibility for implementing, for coordinating all the training and all the supplies of military assistance to Ukraine, which now I think it's over 50 countries, not just NATO members. That's significant, that's important, that's long term. And that hopefully will be backed by pledges, of financial, if you like, spending guaranteed by allies to the tune of about 40 billion. Let's see how this funds out. We shall await the communique. But I think this will be probably the most important actual decisions of the summit. Then there's collective security.
If I may just interrupt you, Rob, because you said the operative word there is spending. I think that's going to be my next question. There was also a recent communique from the White House just as the summit started yesterday. Very much, and in that it says very much it's important progress since 2014, that allies were spending 2% of GDP on defense, noting now, though, that every ally should have a plan to meet the 2% benchmark as soon as possible. Mind you, Russia spends about 7%. I want to just show a quick graphic now to our viewers. We see here these actual pledges, or rather how much people are spending in the alliance of those 32 member states. And we do see a dissonance, with the very top being very much the United States, being Poland exceeding that 2%. And if we look at the very bottom, we can see countries that are lagging behind major nations like Italy and Spain. Actually, Spain is in the very last position, and Canada as well. So, I mean, how uncomfortable is it going to be for these larger, very capable countries like Spain, Italy, and Canada? Will they get rattled into spending more at the summit? What's your take, Robert?
Well, I will not be there in the room, but I can tell you that, frankly, and perhaps diplomatically, I hope that they will feel very uncomfortable. Because by not doing what they themselves pledged, their countries pledged 10 years ago, and some of those on those lists, or most of them actually include some pretty affluent countries, members of G7, they are, they are not showing the necessary degree of solidarity. This is fundamental. We can talk about, assistance to Ukraine. That requires money. We should talk about the plans, defense plans, which were adopted last year in Vilnius, but they require implementation. And implementation means that you have to, first of all, create the necessary forces, because NATO is lacking some of the forces to the tune of perhaps over 50 brigades. They need equipment. You need to ramp up their defense production. How on earth are you going to do it if there is not enough money in the kitty? So in other words, this is where, you have to walk the walk. So during the Cold War, the countries which were not even on the front line, US is almost in a different category. It's always been spending above the average, if you like. But the other countries were spending close to 3%. And now these countries find it difficult for a variety of reasons to spend even 2%, which is the bare minimum. We should be heading higher. So yes, the answer is they should feel uncomfortable, because nice words will not be fully convincing when they are uttered by the leaders of the country. Because if they're not doing the right thing, they're not showing the solidarity, then of course the other countries have to, lift a much heavier burden. And that's just not right. This is not how NATO works. This is not how NATO proved to be successful in the past. So I hope they experience, at least on this score, I don't want them to be, of course, feel totally uncomfortable, because a lot of these countries are major contributors in a variety of ways. But nevertheless, this is the test of ally solidarity at the time when we have those enormous challenges. So yes, I think the US, frankly, statement is almost long overdue. One would have expected US to kind of push a bit harder on the other allies as well. So let's hope, in a positive sense, that this summit will kind of nudge in a very forceful way those allies that are not spending enough, and everybody else to think about even raising the bar, as the frontier states have done.
Yeah, and I think also on one of those founding members, really, it's Canada there. Justin Trudeau, very much, I think, in hot water also politically. One of those countries, I think, that also received recently a letter, bipartisan letter from U.S. senators saying about their frustration about Canada not coming up to that 2%. And I think also Canada leads that battle group in Latvia. That's really key. So by not having the resources, by not having the 2%, aren't they endangering the eastern flank in a way through all this?
Well, in some respects, it's just somebody has to fill those gaps, and the burden falls disproportionately on the US, which, let's be honest, there are these discussions in the US. There is the shadow of President Trump hanging over the summit, and he's made this issue one of his strongest reasons for certain critique, if you like, of NATO. But it is about solidarity. And, if countries feel that this is some kind of, strong pressure, well, one can read historical records from 1950s and 60s when, U.S. presidents used to berate the allies who were not spending enough, at the time of the Cold War, because this was considered to be absolutely politically unacceptable. And frankly, but if you look at the levels of the spending at that time, they were still much higher. So I think for too long, simply put, the countries kind of try to have a cake and eat it. You can no longer, if we were living in sort of nice, peaceful times where we could sort of spend the peace dividend, then okay, that would be politically not very elegant or fully in line with solidarity, but you would not have such big consequences. But now these things do. So, this concerns particularly rich, big countries, because, a change of 0.5% in GDP spending means billions. And those billions should be spent precisely what you're showing on the screen behind you, on the tanks, on the planes, on the naval vessels, etc., etc. And anybody thinks we're not living in the edge of confrontation with Russia and perhaps with China, then they live on a different planet.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, they're major players, not just Canada, but also here in Europe, as we had said, Spain and Italy, notably Italy being in the G7 there as well. Just before we close, I want to get your reaction. One of the things we've heard from the summit is that Ukraine expects this irreversible path to NATO. We're hearing talk about a security guarantee. What would a security guarantee look like for Ukraine? Just briefly now at the end.
Well, the best security guarantee would be membership in NATO. That is not on the cards today because there is no consensus. So, of course, one hopes there will be, the word irreversible does mean something, but let's also be honest, this will be words. So the package dimension has some concrete benefits for Ukraine, and this is what I believe Ukrainians should concentrate on, even though I will understand from their point of view, and frankly from the point of view of the countries who are pushing for, at least nobody is expecting the accession talks to start now before the war ends, but there are various ways in which the process could be accelerated. But opposition of various capitals, Washington, Berlin, a few others, have meant that this is not possible. So we have to live with this. It's an imperfect world, but nevertheless, Ukrainians should take heart from the other decisions and the fact that NATO is standing behind them, helping them to win this war.
Yeah, indeed. So I think there's still going to be plenty of Ukraine support on the agenda as the summit continues in Washington. We'll close it there. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Robert Pszczel, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay tuned for more news and commentary here on TVP World. Goodbye.